Hi, my name's Kenny. I'm with Structured Solutions. We're the makers of SSI tools for Microsoft Project. In today's video, I wanted to show you how you can status tasks in your project as the project progresses through time. This is actually more complex than a lot of people think, so I thought I'd make this video just to show you how to properly status a task and what things you should not do when you're statusing tasks. It's not as simple as just updating date fields or the % complete field in Microsoft Project. So by the end of this video, you should know the proper steps that you need to take in order to status a task to the current status date. Okay, here I am in Microsoft Project, and I've created an extremely simple example project that just has 3 tasks, task A, B, and C. Before I show you the proper way to status these tasks, it's important that you understand what I even mean when I say status a task or update a task. So to status a task means that we're going to update information about that task up to a certain point in time. From the perspective of the schedule, everything before this point in time is considered to be the past. It's done. There's nothing that we can do to change it. And everything that is after this point in time is considered to be the future. We refer to this point in time as the status date of the schedule. You can set the status date of your schedule in Microsoft Project by going to the Project tab, then going over to the section that says Status, and going to the control that says Status Date. In my schedule, I've set the status date to March 3rd, 2023. You can see that date represented in the Gantt chart here by this red dashed line. Now, if you've never set the status date in your schedule and you go and do this and set a status date, you might be confused if you don't see this red dashed line. I've actually gone through some extra steps here to set up this red dashed line in the actual Gantt chart view. I'll show you how to do that real quick. So to do that, we're going to go to the Gantt chart Format tab in Project. Then we're going to go over to this button that says Grid Lines. We're going to click on it. We're going to click the first option in the menu that says Grid Lines. And we're going to scroll down until we find the option in this window that says Status Date. We're going to set its type to, I personally like this bottom option here where it looks like a big dash and then kind of a smaller dash and then a big dash again. And I use the color red for my line. So if you need to see that line, that's one way that you can do it. Okay, let's take a look at our tasks now. Starting off, we have task A, which has a start date of February 21st, 23, and a finish date of February 27th, 23. Task B, which has a start date of February 28th, 23, and a finish date of March 6th, 2023. Task C, which has a start date of March 7th, 2023, and a finish date of March 13th, 2023. Now, at the moment, I have not gone through the process of statusing these tasks up to the status date. So all these dates that you see right here are still considered to be forecast dates. If I open the actual start and actual finish columns, you'll see that I have NAs in all of those. So what we need to do now is actually go through the process of statusing these tasks up to the status date so we can know which of these dates actually did occur and which of these dates are still considered to be forecast dates. Okay, let's start with task A. The first thing that we need to think about when we start statusing a task is where the current start and finish dates are relative to the status date. Now, one thing that you might notice right away is that these 2 dates are prior to the status date that I have set. So my status date is March 3rd, 2023. Both of these dates are before that date. That means that I need to either mark these dates as actual dates, or I need to update the start or the finish date, perhaps both, to be after the status date if neither of these dates actually occurred, if this task didn't start or finish prior to the status date. Now I'm going to open up the column called % complete in Project, and I'm going to show you something that a lot of people do that you should not do. Let's say that Whoever is responsible for doing task A said that task A is 60% complete. Oftentimes what people will do is they'll just go to this percent complete field and they'll throw 60 in there. You should not do this. You never want to enter a number in the percent complete field. The reason being is the percent complete field is a field that Microsoft Project automatically calculates, and it's a duration-based percent complete. That means that it's all based on how much of the task duration has passed since the task has started up to the current status state. Microsoft Project allows us to plug a number in here, but it's one of those things in Project that even though the tool lets you do it, you should never do it. A lot of times when people just enter dates in the percent complete field, they don't actually go through the proper steps of adjusting the start and finish dates of the task. And that's not good because we have no idea on task A right now when this task is going to finish. If the task truly is 60% complete, according to the person responsible for working the task, then we should have an actual start date that's prior to the status date, which Microsoft Project did put that date in for us as soon as we entered a number here. But the big problem is that we still have a finish date that's showing as February 27th. That's before our status date, and we have no idea if that is the correct date or not. Again, the status date of our schedule is March 3rd, 2023. So the date February 27th, 2023, from the perspective of the project, is considered to be in the past. But again, this task, the person who's responsible for it said the task is only 60% complete. That means that there's no way that this is the correct finish date of the task. What we really need to do is ask that person more questions to understand when they expect the task to finish, and that finish date should be a date that's after our status date, if the task is 60% complete. If we were to leave this task as it is right now without properly statusing it, this is going to have broader implications on the rest of the project because this task A is tied to task B. And right now, project thinks that task B can start on February 28th, the day after task A is scheduled to finish. But we know that this finish date isn't right, so therefore we know that task B isn't right, and task B is tied into task C. So therefore we know that the dates for task C are not right. And in a real world schedule, we won't be able to trust any of the dates in our project if the project isn't statused properly. So let's go back to task A and status this task the proper way. I'm going to remove this percent complete value from the task. The proper way that we would status task A would be to work with whoever is responsible for task A and ask them these questions. Okay, the task was scheduled to start on February 21st, 2023. Is that the date that the task started? And whoever's responsible for doing task A is going to tell us yes, or they're going to tell us no. If they tell us no, then we need to know what date the task did actually start. If it did actually start, if it's a date that's prior to our status date, or what date they think it's going to start if it's a date that's after the status date. In other words, what's the forecasted start date? In this scenario, let's just pretend that the person responsible for task A said, yes, this task did start on February 21st, 2023. I'm going to go ahead and plug that date into the actual start field in project. And that's fine because this date is prior to our status date of March 3rd, 2023. The next thing that we need to do is figure out either when the task actually finished, if the finish date is prior to the status date, or when the task is forecast to finish, if the finish date is after the status date. So again, in order to figure this out, we're just going to ask the person responsible for this task, hey, the task was scheduled to finish on February 27th, 2023. Is that the date that the task actually finished or not? So in this scenario, let's just pretend that the person who's responsible for task A comes back to me and says, no, I didn't finish the task on February 27th. In fact, I think I'm only 60% done with that task. Well, rather than them just giving me a percent complete that they think they're done with the task, what I need them to give me is an updated finish date. So again, I need to ask the question, well, when do you think the task is going to be finished? And I'll need them to provide some kind of date that I can plug into project. So let's pretend that the forecast finish date that I was told to use for task A is March 8th. That date works because it's after our status date. So what I want to do is I want to make the task finish on March 8th, but instead of just adjusting the finish date field or entering a value in the finish date field, I'm going to use the duration field. And in fact, I'm not even going to use the duration field. I'm going to use the remaining duration field. The reason that I'm using the remaining duration field instead of just typing in the date in the finish date field is that the finish date field, when you adjust this, can potentially alter the start date of your task because Microsoft Project defaults to keeping the duration constant of the task whenever you adjust either the start or the finish date here. So I would not adjust the finish date by actually entering a value in there. I've inserted the remaining duration field, and this is what I recommend using over the regular duration field. Because for your tasks in progress, you're always going to be wanting to look at the remaining duration. For the tasks that aren't in progress, their remaining duration is going to equal whatever their regular duration is. So I'm just going to bump this up until I hit the date that I want. Again, that date is March 8th. So I'm at March 6th, so I just bump that up by 2 more days. And now you can see that the task is finishing on March 8th. I'll show you a neat trick to update the finish date of any task in your schedule without needing to actually do this. So I'm going to set this back to 5 days here. And while I have task A selected, if you have SSI Tools installed on your machine, you can go to the SSI Tools tab, and you'll notice that there's a button here that says Adjust Task End Date in the Statusing Tools group. We're going to click on that. That's going to open up this little window right here, and all we need to do in this is select the date that we want. In our case, that's March 8th. Then just click OK. And SSI Tools is going to automatically do that calculation for us. So notice that it adjusted the duration to that 12 days that we want. So we're still not done statusing this task. I want you to notice the percent complete value for task A is still at 0%. Even though we've entered in an actual start date and we've updated our forecast finish date. So the task isn't really 0% complete through its duration. That's wrong. The task has started and it's progressed through time. So the question becomes, how do we adjust the percent complete field without actually typing in a number to it? Well, I'm glad you asked. So to do this, we're going to go to the Task tab. And while we have task A selected here, all we need to do is come to this group that says Schedule and find the button that says Mark on Track. Clicking on this button will mark the task's progress up to the status date. Notice the bar over here in the Gantt chart. There's now a smaller, darker blue rectangle that goes all the way from the start of the task up to the status date. That represents the work that's been completed on the task. Also notice that the remaining duration field changed to 3 days, and the percent complete field was automatically adjusted for us to show 75%. But Kenny, you may be saying, the person responsible for task A told us that the task was 60% complete, not 75% complete. Yes, that's true. So let's real quick just again talk about percent complete. So this field percent complete just represents how much of the task duration has passed from the point that the task started up to the status date and how much of the task is remaining. So this task is 12 days long in total duration. Well, 9 of those days have already passed according to where we set the forecast finish. So 3 days remain. That's 75%. 9 days is 75% of this 12-day duration here. That's where the 75 is coming from. If you were to hover over the percent complete field in Microsoft Project and read the prompt, you'll see that it says that percent complete is the current status of a task expressed as the percentage of the task duration that has been completed. And it shows the formula for how it's calculating that there. Again, the only portion of the task duration that should have been completed is all of the portion of the task duration that's prior to the status date. Otherwise, the task wouldn't be statused correctly. And that again is why rather than typing a number in the percent complete field, we're using the button that says mark on track. So Project can automatically calculate what that percent complete value should be for us. But Kenny, you say, the person responsible for task A says that they think it's only 60% complete. That's their assessment, so why wouldn't we have 60 there? We don't want to show 75, we want to show 60. Well, fortunately for us, Microsoft Project has another field where we can enter in assessed percent completes. That's the physical percent complete field. And this is just a static field. It's not one that Microsoft Project is going to automatically calculate. So this is where we can put the assessed work percent complete of whatever task we're on. Again, in our case, task A, the person responsible for that told us that it was 60% done. So we can type a 60 in there without having any downside consequences or Microsoft Project altering either any of our dates like our start dates or finish dates. So task A is now statused correctly up to the status date. We're ready to move on to the next task. But before we do, I just want to show you one more column that exists here in Project, and that's called the resume date. In the resume date field, you'll notice that on task A, it's showing March 6th, 2023. What does that mean? Well, resume, the date that's in there, is the next date that the task is scheduled to start work. If you've statused a task correctly and the task is in progress, so if a portion of the task is after the status date and the task has some actual work recorded on it, the date that's in the resume column should show the next working date after the status date. So in my case, and if we go and look at our status date again, it's March 3rd, 2023. Well, that happens to be a Friday. Saturday and Sunday here are non-working days. Those are the weekend days. So the following Monday is March 6th, and that's the date that's showing in the resume field here. And I want to make sure that this date that's in resume is accurate for the task that I've statused, and it is for task A. Okay, so let's quickly run through a couple of other scenarios now using task A. So I'm just going to undo everything that I did with task A. I'm going to set its percent complete back to 0. Notice when I do that, it gets rid of my resume date. It also removes my actual start date, and I'm going to set the remaining duration of this task back to 5 days. So it's back to exactly how it was before I started statusing it. This time when we status this task, let's pretend that we asked our task owner, when did the task start? And they told us the task did indeed start on February 21st, 2023. And they also said that it finished on February 28th. 2023. So that wasn't our forecast finish date, the date that we had in the prior reporting cycle, but it is still prior to our status date, so that is an actual finish date. So we'll plug that in the actual finish date column. Okay, notice that when we do that, Microsoft Project automatically made the task 100% complete for me. And the resume date is showing the same date as the actual finish. If a task is 100% complete, the resume date is always going to show whatever the actual finish date of the task is. So again, because these two dates are prior to our status date and the task is marked as 100% complete, this task is correctly statused. Let's move on now to task B. So let's say that we're talking with the person responsible for task B and they say, oh, I'm done with task B is 100% complete. Well, again, you might be tempted to just come to the percent complete field and put 100 in there. But this is not correct. So notice that when we did that, we're showing now an actual finish date of March 7th, 2023. That's wrong. March 7th, 2023 is after our status date of March 3rd, 2023. Because the project views the status date as today's date, everything after the status date is in the future. Therefore, we cannot have an actual finish date of March 7th, 2023. So this date just doesn't make sense given where our status date is. And again, we run into the issue if we were to just leave this date as is, we're going to run into the issue where a whole bunch of other tasks in our schedule may be incorrect because we didn't properly status this task. Like task C, well, task C isn't supposed to start until task B is completed. But right now we're showing that task B completes on March 7th, so this is starting on March 8th, and that's just wrong because if task B is 100% complete, well then the real finish date for task B is sometime before March 3rd. So again, the proper thing for us to do in order to status the task correctly is to always ask the question, no matter what the situation is with the task. So if the person responsible for task B says that it's 100% complete, I need to make sure that I'm asking, okay, when did the task start? Did it start on March 1st? Because it might not have started on March 1st. In this scenario, let's just pretend that it did start on March 1st. But then I need to ask, when did the task finish? Because it sure did not finish on March 7th, the date that we have now, because that's after our status date. And they may say, oh yes, I was able to finish that on March 2nd. So the task only lasted one day, and we can adjust that in our finish date column. And I'm actually going to adjust the actual finish date to March 3rd, 2023. Again, that still works as an actual finish, even though it's the same date as the status date. It's any date that is equal to or less than the status date that can be marked as an actual date. Let's move on now to task C. So task C, if we look at it, is now its current start and finish date are both after the status date. So let's pretend that the person responsible for task C says that they think that task C is 25% complete. Again, lots of people are tempted to just enter 25 in here or go to the task tab and click on this button here that says 25%. So we know now that we should never enter a value in the regular percent complete field. But before I undo it, I just want to show you one other funky thing that manually entering values in here will cause. Notice my remaining duration for task C is showing 3.75 days. Typically, you do not want any of your durations to be in fractional values or have decimals to them. We want these to be whole numbers. If they're not whole numbers, then tasks will kind of behave a little bit funny, and the time of day that tasks start or finish isn't going to be consistent with the time of day that the workday actually starts and finishes according to the calendar in project. So let's undo this now, and let's status this the proper way. So the person responsible for task C, they tell us that the task is 25% complete. So we need to ask, okay, then when did it start? Because it had to have started on a date that is prior to our status date, March 3rd. And they might say, yes, the task, this task started on March 1st, 23. So I've entered in my actual start here for this task, and I want you to real quick just notice in the Gantt that something really funky just happened. What's happening is that Microsoft Project just split this task. So task C, you can see the beginning portion of it in the Gantt bar is now shown like these little dots before the bar becomes whole again. So why is that happening? Well, the reason that that's happening is because we've created an out of sequence condition now. So task C, according to the way that we created the dependencies in the schedule, is not supposed to start until task B is completed. But if we mark the start date of task C, the actual start date of task C, as March 1st, Well, that's before task B actually finished. So we need to resolve this out of sequence condition before we can actually continue. By the way, I would recommend, if you're looking for these out of sequence conditions, to use the SSI dependency tracer. Notice that in the dependency tracer, while I'm selected on task C, in the predecessor side, it's showing the driving slack from task B is -3 days. Anywhere where we have a driving slack of a negative value is going to indicate an out of sequence condition. So if you're an SSI Tools user already, you can use the dependency tracer, and it makes it really easy to find and fix these out of sequence conditions. I'm going to go back to the regular task form in Microsoft Project just to show how you would do this without the dependency tracer. So using the task form, we can see that task C has a predecessor, task B, and that predecessor is a finish to start relationship, which means that task C is not supposed to be able to start until after the finish of task B. In other words, task C shouldn't be able to start until after March 3rd in this case. So what we need to do to resolve this out of sequence condition is we need to either change the dependency type between task B and C to something like start to start or finish to finish. That would resolve the issue for us. Notice that that split is now removed. Or we just remove task B as a dependency altogether and instead make something else a dependency to task C. Perhaps we'll use task A. And that will also resolve the out of sequence condition here because task A finishes on February 28th. Task C starts on March 1st, so we can still have task A as a predecessor with that finish to start dependency type. Now that we've resolved that out of sequence issue, we're ready to continue statusing task C. So now we're going to look to the finish date. So the finish date right now is showing March 7th, but again, we need to ask the question to the person responsible for task C, when do you think task C is going to finish? Again, the task is not done. They told us they think it's only 25% done. So we need them to give us a date where they think the task is going to finish. And they might say March 7th, but they might say something like March 10th. So I'm going to use the SSI adjust task end date tool here to adjust this to March 10th. Again, if I didn't have that tool, I would just need to adjust the remaining duration manually until this date shows March 10th. And now I can just mark task C on track. So again, I'm going to go to the task tab in Microsoft Project and come to this button that says mark on track. And you'll notice that Microsoft Project is going to automatically calculate the correct percent complete for us. So this is the amount of time that's passed since the task started up through the status state. Or this is the percentage of the total duration of the task that has passed from the start of the task up to the status date. And we know that the person responsible for the task only thinks that it's 25% done. We can take that 25 and plug it into the physical percent complete column. Now this task is also properly statused. Let's run through one more scenario with task C. So I'm going to undo all the changes that I made to it and reset it back to its original state. So I'm going to make task B the predecessor to task C. I'm going to come to task C and remove task A as a predecessor to it. And now we can see that task C's start and finish dates are again after the status date. So let's again pretend that we're talking with the person responsible with task C and they say, oh yeah, task C, I haven't started that task yet, it's 0% complete. Well, again, even though it's 0% complete, it doesn't mean that we're not going to do anything to the task. Well, we need to go through and again just ask, hey, the task is currently forecast to start on March 6th. Is that still the correct date? And the person responsible for task C might tell us, yes, that's still the correct date, or they might tell us, no, it's going to be on a different date. Let's pretend that task C, we're told, is not going to start until March 8th. Well, that's a forecast date because it's after our status date. So we know that we're not going to be entering anything in the actual start date column. So how do we get this to move to start on March 8th? Well, there are a couple ways that we could do it. First, we could just enter the date in the start field. So I'm going to type in March 8th, 2023, and then I'll hit enter. And I just want to show you that I'm getting a message box that's opening up, giving me some kind of warning where it's saying you move task C away from task B and the two tasks are linked. As a result, the link between the two tasks will not drive the start of the later task. So this is just saying, hey, task C is no longer being driven by the finish of task B. And so project is now asking me what I want to do with the task. It says I can move the task and remove the link, or I can move the task and keep the link, or I can just cancel and not just undo anything that I'm trying to do here. In my case, I want to select the option move the task to start on March 8th and keep the link, because the link is still correct. We're just going to be delaying task C, the start of it, by a couple days. What I want you to know is that what that really did is it threw a constraint date on task C of March 8th, 2023. Now there's different constraint types that exist in Microsoft Project. In this case, when you enter a date in the start field, Project is automatically going to put a start no earlier than constraint on the task. This is a soft constraint, so this is okay. The other option that I would have had, rather than entering a date in the start field, is I could have just opened up these two columns, constraint type and constraint date, and set the constraint type to start no earlier than, and then change the date here to March 8th. In addition to that, some other options that I could have done is I could have adjusted the dependencies on task C. Perhaps I had another task that was a better predecessor than task B, or I could have added a lag on the dependency between task B and task C. So I could have thrown a 2-day lag on there. That would have been another thing that I could have potentially done. So the last thing that we need to do to finish statusing this task is to make sure that we have the correct forecast finish date on here. Right now, the forecast finish date is March 17th, but we always, again, want to make sure that we're asking the question, is that the date that we expect the task to finish, or is it going to be some kind of different date? For us, we'll pretend that the person responsible for task C says, I think the task is going to finish on March 15th. Now, I already know some of you might be thinking to yourself, well, you just adjusted a date in the start field, so why can't we actually just type a date in the finish field? Remember, I told you not to type dates into the finish field. Instead, you just want to adjust the remaining duration. Well, let me show you now what actually happens if you manually type in a date in the finish date field. So I'm going to type in March 15th, 2023, and I'll hit enter. Since I still have the constraint type and constraint date columns open, you can see that my constraint type was changed to what's called a finish no earlier than. The constraint date was changed to March 15th, and my start date was changed to March 6th, where before my start date was March 8th. So those are the reasons why we don't actually want to enter a date into the finish field, because it's going to mess with our start date. So let's undo that. And now again, what I want to do, let me adjust the Gantt here. What I want to do is just go to the remaining duration column and adjust this until I get the finish date that I want. So I'll just bump this down by 2 days, and now the task is finishing on March 15th. This task is now status, it's ready to go. Both the start and finish date are after the status date, and we're showing 0% complete. That's correct. Now, just to put the finishing touches on this schedule here, I'm gonna go back to task A and task B, both of which are prior to our status dates. We have actuals, so they're both 100% complete. And I will just enter a 100 in the physical percent complete column for those tasks. So now everything in this schedule is status properly up to the status date, and I'm ready to perhaps send this schedule off to my customer or start reviewing it with the program manager or the rest of the project team. So in that simple schedule, I walked you through all the different scenarios that you're going to run into when you're statusing your projects up to the current status date. And I showed you the steps to properly status the tasks so that the dates in the schedule can be trusted going into the future. I really hope that you enjoyed this video and found it to be helpful. And if you did, please consider subscribing to this channel and hitting that like button. In this video, I showed you a couple of different SSI tools that help me do things like adjust task end dates and see those out of sequence conditions. In the future, I'm going to create a video that's going to show you how you can use even more SSI tools to really streamline the process of statusing your schedule and avoid some of those mistakes that a lot of people make. SSI Tools is an add-in for Project that really helps Microsoft Project users build, maintain, and get useful analyses out of their projects that they can help the project team with. If you're interested in learning any more about that, please visit us online at ssitools.com. I hope to see you there.